So, Mike, welcome to Constituting America's Constitutional Chats. We're so glad to have you with us today. And we hope you could just give us a few opening comments on just Congress and the problems that you see and how you are suggesting that they be fixed. And then we'll go to questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Kathy, and everybody for having me on. I'm really thrilled to be here. And I don't just say that, you got a wonderful organization, and I've listened to previous discussions, particularly some of those dealing with federalism. So I'm happy for the opportunity to participate in those discussions and take some questions that I may or may not answer. So um, uh, I guess part of what my involvement in these issues and in Congress is all about is that at a quote from a movie, at a time long, long ago in a political galaxy far, far away, I was on the Hill and part of a structure and mechanism that got things done. People talked to each other. People worked with each other. The legislature passed bills, made public policy, and on and off worked with the administration, particularly during the time when the Reagan agenda was adopted, and that was what I think today people recognize as something that was transformational in American history and very important to the country in a lot of respects. Sometimes I feel like the ghost of Congress past, talking about times that don't necessarily exist anymore. But and they weren't all good times and successful. Um, um, there were the constant problems with political interaction that have been with us since the beginning of the country, but have also been good. I mean, dissent and diversity in politics and in the way our republic was formed is a good thing, but it just seems to really have gone off the track. And so there's and Jerry Clymer, we both went through that whole period and then um, watched as the system degenerated over the last 20, 25 years, and just really had a concern for that. When we wrote Surviving Inside Congress, that was written primarily as a guide for members of Congress and staff who were coming to Washington without any real knowledge of how the system worked, the kind of experience they needed to run our government. And so we wrote that as something that would help them get started and get a running start at the responsibilities that they had to fulfill. And I was riding in a cab one day, coming from the Hill to my office downtown, and I just always enjoyed talking to cab drivers. They just were the fonts of wisdom you never imagined sometimes. And so I was talking about the book Surviving Congress and what it was and what we were trying to do with it. I don't know how we got on the conversation, but anyway, cab drivers said, "Well, why don't you write one of those for us so we know what the bleep is going on up there? We're just kind of left in the dark, and things don't look very good." And I said, "Well, okay." And so Jerry and I talked about that, and we set about doing that. And this was, gosh, 5, 6 years ago. I think that we really got serious about putting it together. And since then, the environment has simply gotten worse. The productivity has gone down. But most importantly, we have reached a point where the public simply doesn't trust the people that are supposed to represent them, and they don't trust the system anymore. I think the number is 11% now who have trust in Congress and believe it's effective. And that's not a new phenomenon. It's been around for quite some time, but it is just constantly gotten worse. And we are firm believers that without public trust, you can't govern. And without governing, people get angry, they get hostile, and they walk away from the system. And that is happening more and more. The numbers and the evidence of that is just overwhelming. So we found that there were four major overarching areas that really needed attention. And our focus was on Congress because Congress is the first line of defense for American citizens. It's where they are supposed to go and normally can go to get their grievances resolved and to participate in this whole concept of self-rule. So our focus has been on Congress. If we don't do something about Congress, it's going to be impossible to do something in other fields. So we looked at four overarching concerns that we had. One is civics education, and the level of civics education across the country has been going down for years. The surveys and research data, again, is very, very clear on that, and you could cite them for an hour. The most recent Annenberg survey research found that only 40% of the American people can name all branches of the federal government. Only 10% can't name one. People don't believe that that presidents have to abide by decisions of the Supreme Court. So many people don't know how many justices there are and or who won the Revolutionary War. You know, it's really sad. And there are now 13 states, 11 to 13 states, I think, that don't even require civics education in the classroom. They don't require students to pass a civics exam before they graduate. Us older people are in the same kind of situation because government and politics have changed so dramatically that people just aren't keeping up, can't keep up, and it doesn't matter their level of education or their income or gender or anything else. It is a pervasive problem in our society, and so that's that's what we started with, and that's where we are, and it's a mission, and it's a labor of love to that organizations like yours contribute greatly to. So here I am. Uh,
That's great. And we really look forward to diving in as we go through our questions to some of your ideas for reform of Congress. And I know that Janine's got a lot of questions, so I'm going to go ahead and toss it to Janine.
okay.
Okay, thank you for that informative opening. And as I'm listening to you talk about the way, Congress, the lack of civics. Well, first of all, lack of civics education. That's one of our main missions at Constituting America is
Right.
the George Washington Speaking Initiative, where we actually go into the classrooms for free and give a kind of a fun, Socratic, student leader discussion, involvement about why interactive, why the government matters, and it's really we the people. It's not we the government, and all the things that we teach, just near and dear to our heart. So we're on the same mission with you. And as I'm listening, I'm thinking about the era where you were there, and it was better than it is, at least now. And my first thought, of course, is that they probably didn't have C-SPAN in every room, and social media didn't exist, and there wasn't all the press, and people felt free probably to really deliberate without having someone breathing down their back and listening to their every thought. That's one thing I would like to circle back to. But before I hand it back to you, I think about James Madison and how the lack of trust in Congress. And I wrote a petition entitled the Truth Act, which was to limit the page numbers of the bills to 30. That's the acronym, right? T is for 30, that our representatives have to read them. Our representatives have to understand the bills. Our representatives have to testify they understand the bills before they vote. And then the people have a due amount of time to read the bills, like Jefferson always wanted, to make sure we even understand it, so that we can even know how we want to direct our representative to vote. And so one of the things, and it was interesting, we did a white paper based off this, and most of the bills before, say, 1970 in the mid 80s were under 30 pages. Shockingly, it was a stunning little white paper that we did, that there were revelations. And James Madison said, and I quote loosely, but if the laws are so voluminous that they cannot be read, and so incoherent that they cannot be understood, it's of no avail for the people to vote for someone of their choice, because no one's going to understand what's going on. And I want to toss it back to you, where I think there's so many elements, but one of the elements, and there's a fight going on for this today, and they're considered extremists, but I really think that their pulse is in the right place. There needs to be due time to look at a bill. Our representatives, they all need to be able to look at the bill. It shouldn't be decided behind 5 people in a closed door room. And that the bills are just too big, so nobody knows what's going on up there. And I think James Madison was quite prescient to point that out. So I wanted to know what you thought about the aspect of the bills. And I was shocked to find out really the extent of it, that our representatives sometimes don't even get a say. They don't get to really read it. They don't get to they don't know what's in it. I mean, that's obviously why I wrote the petition, but it's even worse than that. And it's, these decisions are being made by 5 or 6 people behind a closed door. They do the Emmys that way, and I don't like that either. I don't think 5 people should be judges on a performance. I think the whole guild union should vote. But what do you think about the page numbers of the bills being so incredibly high?
Yeah, I can't recall offhand how many pages there are in the Federal Register, but it is just tens of thousands. The problem that you cite is a legitimate one, and one that concerns an awful lot of members. I recall very well, I think it was a State of the Union address when Reagan came up to the Hill. And in part of his speech, he addressed that subject, and it was on the omnibus appropriation bills that he was being sent, that were just, this thick. And he pulled one up from the side of the podium and threw it over the podium onto the floor of the House, and it was a boom. And, he said, I'm not going to sign any more of these. I didn't read it. You haven't read it. So we've got to change that system. Well, he did sign others during his presidency, and presidents have been signing them from then on. Part of the reason, again, is the inability of Congress to stick to a schedule and an agenda and bring up bills individually. We have not passed all 12 appropriation bills separately in the House since 1997. And that's the way they're supposed to be handled separately. Now they lump them all together in this last round to avoid a shutdown. They actually divided those 12 bills up into 2 packages of 6 each. Well, that may be called progress by some, but not by me. They've got to get back. There is so much in one appropriation bill that members find it hard even to read just one, because the departments of government have become so large that just one bill is that way. So that is one of the critical reforms that need to be made. I don't know if they will ever reach a point where they get them down to 30 words in it or 30 pages in it anymore. But they do need to get them down to a level where they focus on what's important and keep it short enough and concise enough so that more members can read them.
Yes, Kathy and I walked up the hill because Kathy knows everybody, and we visited different congressmen and senators even, and one congressman from Texas put a bill in my lap, and it was a book, like you say, what, a foot and a half tall, and then he said, and then he put another one in my lap and said, now these are the amendments. Or no, he put another one, goes, this is the one with amendments, but they don't even tell us what page number, where the amendments even are. And and you might try to search something, but you might not be use the correct search word. And it just harkens right back to what James Madison said. But for our young listeners that are with us today, because we have school children listening, there are a lot of buzzwords that I'm learning too in DC we throw around, but a lot of times, can you explain to our students what an appropriations bill is?
Yeah, good idea. Thank you. There are three main kinds of pieces of legislation. One is appropriation bills, the other is authorization bills, and the other are resolutions and vehicles like that, where for the budget and other issues that actually don't become statute. An appropriation bill, there are 12, and each one is divided basically by the departments of the executive branch: Interior, Transportation, Defense, Homeland Security. They all have their individual appropriation bills. And the appropriation bills actually tell the department how much money they will be able to spend in the year. The authorization bills are the ones that authorize the actual programs and set out a general format for how much money is involved. But they authorize programs, appropriations authorize spending. And that's another problem we have. There are some agencies of the government that haven't been reauthorized in 30 years. The authorization committees aren't able to do their job because of the dysfunction, because of the gridlock and everything. But those are basically the three tranches of bills that are brought up in Congress. Was that clear as mud?
Right, that's clear as mud. And I have about 1 minute left in my time here with our little clock. But gosh, where do you even begin with that in 1 minute? Especially, I find, so they haven't even been passed. So in other words, they just keep, debt ceiling, debt ceiling, debt ceiling. They're just kind of kicking the rock down the road, but none of these different divisions of bureaucracy have been approved, and the budgets are just how are they approving? If they're not approving it, how is it happening?
Well, what they end up doing is simply extending the authorization of the program without making any changes. One of the principal responsibilities of the Congress is oversight, to oversee federal programs, see where they need to be changed or updated, and also where they need to be eliminated. Either by sunset or just refusing to authorize them so they have no force of law anymore, and then the president and the executive have to get rid of them. But the oversight responsibility is not being carried out the way it's supposed to. So they just reauthorize these programs by simply extending their previous authorization. That's basically how that comes about.
Wow. Okay, you're just going to have to come back. We could talk about this forever. Okay, I'm going to toss to Tova because I have to share with
Sure.
four other exceptional panelists. Okay, thank you so much.
All right, it's great.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for writing the book.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go, Tova.
Thank you, Janine. So I read through a lot of the book, and you did a really great overview of the kind of broad concepts, but I wanted to narrow in on one point I thought was interesting, where you highlight one issue with Congress is the lack of education and training for new members of Congress and their staff. I thought that was really interesting. So could you explain what kind of the current process is to train new members of Congress and their staff, and what you think is lacking in that, and how it could be improved in the future?
Well, it's thank you, Jenny. That's a good question. The members there, as you know, and your colleagues probably know, there isn't any specific curricula in most colleges that educate an individual to serve in public service, particularly to serve in Congress, whether it's a member or a staff person. So it's a unique environment and it's a unique profession, similar sometimes to state legislatures, but really it's far different than that. The government is just so big and so complicated that you could use a college degree, advanced degree, to just understand what it's all about. So that's an initial problem that members and staff face, but more importantly is that lack of knowledge and inability to get a proper education, by citizens, because their vote has to be based on knowledge. Their activism has to be based on knowledge and understanding of how things work. I've got an old friend who is also retired. His name is Chris Matthews. He was on MSNBC for a long time, but he and I were press secretaries together on the Hill. He for Tip O'Neill and me for Bob Michael, and two people who got along well together, but that's a different story. At any rate, Chris used to tell this story at dinners and in speeches about the importance of citizens having to know who on legislative staff were important, who they should contact about an issue or a concern, and how do you identify those people at all? And he used to tell the story of he used former Senator Bill Bradley of New Jersey. I don't know if the story is true or not, but Senator Bradley was at a dinner one evening, and he was on the dais, and things hadn't gotten started yet. And the waiter came by and put a slab of butter on his bread plate. And Bradley turned to the waiter and he said, "I'll have two, please." And the waiter said, "No, I'm sorry, there's just one to a customer." And Bradley said, "No, I want two slabs of butter with my bread." And the waiter said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't do that." And so Bradley said, "You have any idea who I am?" And the waiter said, "Well, actually, no, sir." And he said, "I am a Rhodes Scholar. I'm was an All-American basketball player, All-Pro. Um, uh, I uh, um, I am a member of the United States Senate. I've written books, and I am the guest of honor at this dinner. I'm going to speak shortly, so I'll have two slabs of butter." And the waiter said, "Senator, do you know who I am?" And Bradley said, well, no." He said, "I'm the man in charge of the butter." And that is a very important lesson that people need to learn. Just one of the many things that citizens need to learn. That is that goes back to what we talked about the book Surviving Congress. Members so desperately need more training and more education and more background, a better grounding in history, so that the past is prologue, and history is incredibly important to understand how we got here, who got us here, what they intended, and how things have evolved while the world has changed, but our fundamental principles have not. And our Constitution has remained solid through all of this period of time. But so that's, that's where we are now, and why we wrote Fixing Congress.
Mm, that was a really comprehensive answer, so thank you.
Sure.
Something you said made me wonder, have you looked at state legislatures? And do you feel like they have some of the same problems broadly, or is that not as much your area of expertise?
Well, state legislators and systems of government in the states have very similar problems, simply because they are political institutions like the federal government. I know Janine likes national government, is. But the differences are that state legislators respond to a much smaller group of people, and they have different forms of representation that make what they do a little more effective. I don't think we have expanded the size of the House of Representatives since 1913. And when Congress was created, I think each representative represented 30,000 people. Today, they represent 760,000 people. So that's one of the huge problems with the ability to stay close to your constituents and to stay close to your neighbors and your community, and keep that feel for it, so that you are an effective representative. That's much easier to do at the state level. That's kind of a good study of federalism, which you've been talking about in previous programs, because it is our system of government is something that requires members of Congress to make some very difficult decisions sometimes. One of which is, are you dedicated to a national interest, or are you dedicated to a community interest, a parochial interest of your constituents? Sometimes those two things don't gel. Sometimes one is contradictory to the other. And so members of Congress have to make that choice within the whole context of federalism. So I better quit there.
No, that's really interesting. And then just for my last minute, I wanted to ask about how you feel we can decrease interpersonal animosity between Congress people and cultivate a more bipartisan atmosphere. Like for instance, I heard kind of a theory that more Congress people are spending more time in their home districts, which is great because they get to like interact with their constituents, but that kind of leaves less time to spend in Washington, kind of getting to know their peers, which I guess could down the road lead to more animosity. So what are your suggestions?
Well, another very good question. This is going to be easy. The situation has gotten so bad that it used to be, well, when I was up there and the Congress passed, members kind of stopped the bickering at the water's edge. They kept it on a professional and business-like level, and kept the personal animosity and the personal slings and arrows out of their relationships. And they did that by going to dinner together and hate to say it, but going on trips abroad that frequently called junkets, and engaging in other activities where they could get to know each other personally, and more importantly than that, even to get to know each other's families and their communities. Members from New York would go to a congressional district in Kansas for a few days and be escorted around by the local congressman so they could get a feel for what life was like. Bob Michael, my mentor and boss, he and his wife would have dinner relatively frequently with Tip O'Neill and his wife. And those kind of relationships built what they call in the marketing and PR business, conditioning the environment for change. If you have a healthy environment, then you're going to have healthy decision making that comes out of it. And that kind of thing was pretty pervasive back then. We created the Congressional Institute back in 1997 for the purpose of bringing members together, the Republican members at the time, but we also created organizations subsidiary to that worked on doing bipartisan conferences and retreats, and also retreats between House and senators. You know, that's another issue besides the partisan lack of partisan interaction. So, and one of the key ingredients that we incorporated in the retreats were spouse and children's programs, so that everybody participated and the families could do things together, the spouses could do things together, the children got to know each other, and that just created a healthy environment. The other thing that happened that you referred to is that the Congress, particularly the House, got in the habit of conducting business on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and then letting the members go home on Friday and come back Monday night so they could spend time with their constituents. There's a lot wrong with that. So now they're getting back to a legislative schedule that keeps members of Congress in Washington for 3 weeks and lets them go home for a week to work the district. That gives the members of Congress the opportunity to go to Rotary clubs or union halls during the week, visit factories and those kind of things, and not try to get around on the weekends. So that is helpful. But we have a problem now. It's not just that Republicans don't want to talk to Democrats. We got Republicans that don't want to talk to Republicans. And that's a pretty sad state of affairs.
Well, thank you very much. I'll now pass on to Jewel and Jordan.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for so far in the show. Can't wait to pick your brain a little bit more. So we see Congress as just a very, confusing mess oftentimes. So when there is a small group in Congress, let's say 10 congressmen that really want to see these things happen, such as making shorter bills or trying to get a little more lock on the budget, what is their path? How can they actually really affect the change if so many are just willing to sit back and, keep passing the budgets, keep the allowances happening, and not really change anything because they don't see the ultimate negative in it?
Well, very good question. There are several elements to that. And one is that there is strength in numbers. And just as citizens engage in activism and they are more successful as they bring in more members of their community and try to influence the process, so too is it true that in Congress, members that want to do that, and believe me, there are far more than 10, there's really a frustration up there that is considerable. It's worse than I've ever seen it. But they have to gain in numbers, and again, like I said before, they have to condition the environment for change. They have to lobby their own members. They have to lobby the press and outside institutions to gain favor for the reforms they want to accomplish. A good example is the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress that was created when Paul Ryan was Speaker. And I think Nancy Pelosi was then the Democratic Minority Leader. They created a select committee that that was bipartisan in nature. There were equal number of Republicans, equal number of Democrats, and dedicated to the idea of modernizing Congress and changing the rules like you're talking about. And it set about its work. There was another select committee created at the same time. I'm very proud to say that that the Congressional Institute and a number of us had an awful lot to do with that conditioning of the environment. We helped write the resolutions and lobby members of Congress. I think we lobbied 70 or 80 members of Congress. It was a lot of work to increase support for that, and it passed. And the Modernization Committee met, and it was all in a bipartisan and very civil atmosphere. And everybody on the committee knew that Congress needed some help. So I think they eventually reported out well over 100 reforms, most of which were enacted by the House, most of which were procedural and not anything you're going to write home about, but they were important for the internal functions of the House. And that's really what has to happen. You've got to pull issues and what you want done out of the partisan environment and really out of politics and focus on the governing aspect of what you're doing. And then you've got to sit down and do your little table of what you want to accomplish and find where there is agreement. Like Henry Kissinger, the former Secretary of State, used to use the idea of linkage in most of what he did. You find something you agree on, you link it here, then you find something else you agree on and link it, and before you know, you've got a chain that can't be broken. And so that's how that. Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's a fascinating concept, and it leads perfectly into kind of what I wanted to ask as well, which was that there seems to be, like you said, there's frustration. I mean, it's a messy question, so bear with me, but there's frustration in Congress. There's always been, corruption. Men have failed. If we look back into 60s, 70s, 80s, there's so many scandals we could point to. And yet today, is there something mechanistically different or systematically different? Is there something different? Because we don't even see parties seem to make deals that further their own political will. So if we look at what just happened with that the Republican Party did with passing the CR, there doesn't seem to be a plan from moving forward that's even giving, even if you don't agree with it, that seems to move a political will forward, or position a political party to be more advantageous. It's like, uh if you're looking at it from the outside, you'd really struggle to even figure out motives. And so is there something different now from, because we had lobbying, I think, in the 90s, but yet Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton were able to have a lot of political will, get a lot of different things done, whether you agree with it or not.
Yeah, yeah, no, it was very productive, but um, uh, back then, it was Newt Gingrich was speaker and Bill Clinton was president. There were some very difficult um, fights and disagreements that took place, particularly over balancing the budget, but they eventually got it done, and they got it done that way. There was a strong belief that the general public was sick of big government, that wanted it cut back, and wanted the budget balanced because they were just being taxed to death for so long. And so they did that, and they did it through that concept of linkage. There is today less of an opportunity to do that because there is so much animosity, and the politics is driving the system so much more than it did before. I mean, politics has always been politics. It's a decision-making process that's used in the governing system, but it has just gotten so strident and so angry and ugly, maybe reflecting what's going on in society as well, that it's really difficult to pursue that kind of bipartisanship. It happened on the transportation bill. It's happened twice now in avoidance of a shutdown recently. But for the most part, look at immigration and other things, it's not happening. And so that if we don't reform and strengthen the core, which is civil discourse and functioning together, then Congress has to reform itself in that way before the people who are well motivated can do that. The motivations in Congress are similar to what they are in society as a general. Remember that people that come to Washington come from communities all over the country, and they're former business people and former laborers, whatever. So motivations aren't really that different. We talk about that in detail in the book about why members come to Congress. Some come because they're ambitious and want to become president. Quite a few, actually. And then there are others who come to Washington because they are enamored with the exercise of power and want to be powerful themselves. We have others who come with the motivation to do something better and go back home. And all of those things have to be homogenized in some way before you can achieve what you're talking about.
Well, thank you very much. I bet we
Sure.
have some audience questions and some others from the panel, but
Okay.
definitely a must-read book.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much. I think so too.
Well, thank you, Jewel and Jorn and Tova and Janine. And before we go to the audience questions, we want to recognize our teachers and classrooms that are with us today. And Cherie Stiegel is watching today with homeschool students. And so Cherie, thank you for being on. And if you are a teacher or watching with a class, we didn't give you a shout out, please type your school and name in our Q&A, and we'll try to do that before the end of the show. We also want to thank our listeners in Las Vegas's KKVV 1060 AM. This show airs on Monday evenings at 6 p.m. Pacific. So thank you, Las Vegas's KKVV, for airing this program. So Mike, we've got a lot of great audience questions. We'll start with Michael Hogan, who says, Mr. Johnson, you speak of reforms. Throughout our history, the most substantial reforms have come in the form of constitutional amendments. but all previous amendments have been proposed by Congress before approval and ratification. Article 5 has a second clause offering the states an opportunity to do the same. What are your thoughts on an Article 5 convention for proposing amendments, and do you support the current effort to call such a convention where debates can be had to structure such proposals?
No. I simply don't. Not in this environment. A constitutional convention would come apart at the seams and just cause unbearable havoc. You have to enter into that kind of thing first with restrictiveness that limits what you're going to do or not do. And you have to go in with a specific outcome in mind. The founding fathers had an entirely different relationship among them than convention goers would have now. So no, I really can't do that. On the major reform process, it's not necessarily true that they've all come from amendments to the Constitution. We have had 4 times in our history where major reform efforts have come to be through the kind of thing we were talking about earlier, major joint committees on reform and modernization that made transformational changes in how the Congress worked. So that can be done and should be done. We get a joint committee, bipartisan committee, bipartisan, bicameral, that can sit down and do what the Select Committee on Modernization did, and we'll go a long way.
Well, thank you. And we have a couple of questions about constitutional amendments. Bill Herrenberg asked, do you think a constitutional amendment to have single subject bills is a practical solution? And then Sharon had emailed in a question about the 17th Amendment. And I think that's one of the suggestions in your book for reform, possibly, is to, do you want to talk about both of those?
Yeah, I don't think single-based bills is a reality. It can be a reality. The process is just gotten too complex. The government is too big, and so I don't think that is workable. But the fact remains that whether you want single-based bills or you want the government to be bigger or the government to be smaller or the government to be libertarian or socialist, you've got to legislate to do it. And so the first thing that needs to be done is get the Congress in a situation where it actually can govern. It can pass legislation. Then you've got the soil that you can plant the seeds of changes in policy and direction. Otherwise, it's just, it's talk. You're talking the talk, but not walking the walk. So that really has to come first.
Well, thank you. Now a listener emailed.
Wait a minute. I'm sorry, Kat, there was one other question there, the second one.
The 17th
The
Amendment.
17th Amendment. Yeah, we do go into great detail in the book on that. And there's support for it. There has been support for it simply because the Senate and House have kind of grown together in terms of the politics and how they act. And the Senate is no longer the cooling mechanism that George Washington talked about. And so in order to preserve the centrality of the states in the federalist system, it might be beneficial to think about senators being appointed by state legislators again.
Do you think there's ever a possibility that could happen?
Not now. Just like I say, the fields need to be plowed first.
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate. It's really
What
sad.
I'd say about that, what I'd what I'd say, sorry to interrupt, but what I'd say about that is the only way that would ever happen would be through a convention of states. Congress is never going to pass that amendment themselves. The senators, are you kidding?
Certainly the
They would
Senate.
never
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
They would never do it. Yeah. So I think I think that there is good if it's very singular, very specific. A convention of the states is one of the most brilliant valves that our founding fathers gave us in a check and balance in our Constitution. I really love that thought, but I can't imagine the Senate or the House ever passing a bill that would, or for passing an amendment to reverse the 17th Amendment, unless it was done through the Convention of States. Personally, and
Yeah.
one other thing I just want to throw out, and I want to toss back to Kathy, is there's this segment that I watch on the news. It's called Common Ground, and there really is a lot of common ground happening in Congress. These senators from the right and the left, Democrats, Republicans, they talk about a singular issue. They just don't get the press. I mean, it's the radicals and the fringes on the outsides that are really, steering the ship with just this radical behavior. But there seems to be I think to have a little bit of hope here, there are a lot of people in Congress, is there not, that really do want to work with the other, and there are situations where they are working with one another.
Mhm. Oh, that's absolutely correct. And we have 2 chapters in the book on the problems with the media. You don't want to get me started. But there is common ground. There have been a number of surveys taken and research done on different areas and subjects on which both Republicans and Democrats agree. The fact is that the governing process has to take place in the center. It isn't going to take place on either of the extremes of the political parties. It's going to take place in the center. That has almost always been true throughout our history. So that common ground becomes extremely important, and something that we need to find, and then we need to promote. And unfortunately, you're absolutely right, Janine. The media doesn't not interested in that for a lot of different reasons that we do cover in the book.
Well, thank you. And to close us out, we have a listener who emailed in a question. Casey says, I appreciate hearing the various issues discussed, but I ask that as our country devolves into chaos every day, that we citizens be given practical things we can do. No one wants to hear what we ought to do or should do, could have done, should have done. People are feeling frustrated and hopeless. So what are some things, some practical things that our listeners can do?
Sure. And again, we've got a chapter in the book on this. First of all, you have to understand who's in charge of the butter, so that when you write a member of Congress or call, you know who to ask for and you know what to say. You have to create an action forcing mechanism in your communications with your congressman. Make sure that you ask for something in return so that the communication stays current. Second of all, you need to focus in on issues that you feel particularly strongly about. Don't start taking on 10, take on 1 or take on 2, and then look for places in your community, whether it's with your church or a local civics group, where people are in agreement. And instead of then you've got one letter to or email to a member of Congress, you've got 15 or 20, and then 30 or 40, and get to the press and ask them to cover the issue and use a local hook that makes the issue relevant to your community. There are all kinds of specific things that citizens can do to influence the process. It's something that they can do and should do. So the groundwork is there. There needs to be a lot more discussion about it. There needs to be a lot of fixing Congress books. But it's there and it's doable. I wouldn't be wasting my breath if I thought it weren't.
Well,
And
thank you.
Kathy, to link to what Mike is saying, Mr. Johnson is saying to link, because he talked about the link, which I really love that as well today. You've been a fabulous guest. It just very visual, very matter of fact, gives us
Oh, thank you.
hope and direction. So thank you. But to link to that would be RAPS, right, Kathy? What we teach in the classroom.
Exactly.
Find your singular mission, or one or two, as Mr. Johnson recommends, and then use your First Amendment rights, though religion isn't really a part of it. But RAPS, assembly, press, petition, and speech. But we like to start with speech, start with petition, write it out, use your speech, call the press, book your assembly, and then call your representative.
Yeah.
So that's what we teach the kids.
People behind you.
That's me.
Oh, not a problem.
Well, thank you. And we're a little bit past the top of the hour. So we want to thank you so much for being with us today. We want to thank our audience and thank you for all the great questions from the audience. And we want to invite everybody to come back next week, Tuesday, 2 p.m. Eastern. And we're going to be starting our series on 2024 Supreme Court decisions. And we're going to be talking about a decision on the First Amendment and elected officials' social media, which that decision was just handed down about a week ago. And it's really interesting. And we're going to have an expert on to talk about it. So we hope you all join us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Mike.
Thank
So great.
you. And get Mike's book. It's a wonderful book. Thank you so much.
Thank you
For
for that.
sure.
Bye-bye.